Welcome to your favorite horror storyteller. This video contains several scary stories. Please watch it to the end. There are time codes at the bottom if you want to switch the story. Also, I'm grateful for your support and advice. Thank you. Let's get started. We all have hobbies. There are things we do for money, and there are things we really enjoy. Some of us take amazing photos, some of us spend nights playing online games, some of us compose music in our spare time. One of my hobbies is collecting horror stories. My personal top 10 is invariably stories about the scary, the unknown, and often unexplainable. Why? I myself do not know. Maybe because often the narrator does not give a clear answer to the main intrigue in his story. Maybe because with his last words he sometimes tears the fourth wall to shreds, twisting the story in such a way that a seemingly banal story becomes really scary. About 2 years ago, I was hired as a freelance programmer for a man. We communicated exclusively by phone and ICQ, but soon the questions about the project accumulated so much that I had to arrange a personal meeting. The employer, I will call him John, turned out to be one of those people who very much wants to seem harsh at first glance, but quickly removes this mask. It is only worth making a good impression on him. Sitting in a coffee shop in the city center, we discussed his project, talked about life, about people, about how few honest workers there are now. In between, I carelessly mentioned my hobby. He changed his face for a second. I can see why now. But he didn't let it show and continued the conversation in a jokingly friendly manner. Only from time to time, he bit his lip nervously, staring absent-mindedly into his teacup. Finally, he made up his mind. "So, you collect stories?" "Yeah," I nodded, surprised by this turn of events. John took out a cigarette, but immediately put it back, catching the salesman's slanted glance from behind the counter. "It happened 17 years ago," he began, "back when I still had a best friend. In many ways, Michael and I were complete opposites. I had an easy time with school science, and he had a hard time with it. I seemed like a weak kid compared to my peers, while he played on the basketball team and did more pull-ups than anyone else in the class. I am a reserved person, but he was always the soul of the company. We were united by one common passion. We loved to seek adventure. It began in childhood, when we opened the door to the basement of our house and were the first visitors there in 50 years, if you do not count the rats and cockroaches. The years passed. We grew older. But what remained unchanged in us was the craving for all sorts of adventures. When we saw a barely visible trail in the woods that came close to the town to the north, we couldn't ignore it. The midday sun blazed through the foliage as we stomped along the path, occasionally losing sight of it. Boot prints were imprinted in the dried mud. It had rained here 3 days ago, and it looked like the footprints had been left then. After about 20 minutes, the path led us to the edge of the forest. In the center of a small clearing stood an old village house. But standing was a strong word. The house was leaning sideways, and every single pane of glass in the windows was broken. The house, where a forester or some local hermit had once lived, had become another reminder that time spares nothing in this world. Inside, the house looked no better. The wind howled softly through the empty window frames. The floor was strewn with shards of glass, and spiders swarmed in the corners. There were mountains of half-rotten junk by the walls, covered with tattered fabric. It smelled of rotten wood, and despite the drafts, was quite stuffy. A string of the same muddy boot prints stretched across the floor. We weren't the first curiosity here. The atmosphere inside was such a stark contrast to the sunlit meadow that it made me uncomfortable. We scattered to the rooms. Shuffling my feet on the crumbling plaster, I looked at the sofa with springs sticking out of it, trying to imagine who had last sat on it and how many years ago. Old, abandoned buildings in general are interesting because they give an unprecedented scope for imagination. "Holy shit!" I heard my friend's surprised exclamation. "John, come see this." Michael was squatting, looking at something on the floor. "There's a door to the cellar, and the footprints lead there." He fumbled for the handle on the floor and pulled the door open. It yielded readily. Michael looked down. I can't see anything, it's very dark. We didn't have flashlights, so we hesitated for a while. Young, adventurous, and all that. So I went down first. The stairs creaked so loudly that they could be heard throughout the forest. "What's up?" Michael shouted from upstairs. "The hell I know," I said, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. Then I heard a sound that made my hair stand on end. There was a rustling in the dark corner. You'd have thought it was some homeless guy sleeping in a dark and quiet place, but that's not what made my blood run cold. Along with the sounds of quiet fiddling, I heard the clinking of a metal chain. Somewhere on the edge of my line of sight, I saw the fuzzy outline of a human-like figure. And, shit, I should have run away instead of staring at him. So it wasn't human? John fiddled with his lighter and bit his lip nervously. It was hard to believe, but he didn't think he was embellishing. Anatomically, it was human. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But when it stepped into the light, I had a hard time imagining that there were such people living anywhere in the world. The creature was completely naked, covered head to toe in mud. It looked like... No, it was a skinned skeleton. Long, tangled hair stretched down. A massive chain was attached to his ankle, rattling with every step he took. Before I rushed upstairs, I stared into his eyes. What did I see there? Fear. Animal fear mixed with aggression and something else. That look. I'm gonna have nightmares about it for the rest of my life. We flew out of the house, and in the back of our heads, there was an inhuman scream that turned into a shriek. Ignoring the salesman, John took out a cigarette and lit it. I noticed his hands trembling as he held the lighter to his face. What happened next, I vaguely remember. One day we ended up at my house. On the way, I told Michael exactly what I'd seen. He was a police officer, and he'd been in extreme situations before, and he was quicker than I was. The chains on his leg told me that the poor man had been held captive. Whether for ransom or for fun, there were plenty of perverts in those days. It was then I realized what I saw in that gaze beyond fear. It was despair and a faint glimmer of fading hope. Hope that someone would get him out of this hell. The last time I'd seen that in the eyes of dying wounded was when I'd worked as a doctor in a hotspot. It was horrible. By nightfall, Michael decided to leave the house, to gather the task force and visit the hut again. I, of course, could not sleep. He promised to tell me everything as soon as the special operation was over. After finishing his cigarette, John automatically took a second cigarette out of the box and took another drag. I called him the next morning. The phone was not answered. After no answer in the afternoon, I called his entire precinct. They were reluctant to answer questions, and if I hadn't been a friend of Michael's, whom everyone knew, I would have been sent away. By evening, when the workday was over and there was a chance to talk informally, the investigator, having made me promise 1,000 times to keep silent in front of his superiors, told me what he knew. Did it make me know more? Yes. Did it make you feel any better? Not at all. The first group radioed the police station from the car. They couldn't get into the woods, so they walked home. The radio operator stayed in the car, receiving signals from the radios. As they approached the house, the connection deteriorated. The operatives reported that they were entering the house, but after that it was impossible to make out anything among the noise and interference. About 2 minutes later, the communicator reported hearing gunfire. There was a clanking sound in the background as if he was loading his gun. After another couple minutes, he said he could see something in the distance between the trees. Even the transmission interference couldn't hide the excitement in his voice. When a barely audible rustling sounded somewhere in the distance, his voice broke into a scream. His speech became slurred, and among the general flow of words, he could hear the words of a prayer. Whatever he saw, it threw him into a panic, a man who had been trained for years to keep his cool in any situation. He didn't even try to start the car or get out of the cabin. He just kept repeating over and over that we had awakened the devil. Soon, a single gunshot rang out, and the connection was cut. The second group arrived in the early morning. At the entrance to the forest, they found a police car, the same one on which group number 1 arrived. The interior was completely empty. No bullet marks in the cabin, no blood, no communicator. It was as if they had heard not a gunshot at the station during the night, but a pop, with which he had been carried away into another dimension. The house itself was in complete chaos. Old furniture had been thrown all over the place. The floor was soaked with blood and shell casings, the walls with bullet marks. What had the group encountered in the house that turned 4 armed men into a bloody mess? No one knows to this day. But what really shocked the group was the setting in the basement. In the center of the dark room, they found 2 neatly stacked piles. One contained body parts of the dead policeman, the other the bones that had been gnawed off. The creature had not only killed every last one of them, but had snacked on them. The prisoner had disappeared. In the basement, they found only the chain on which he had been held and the old stinking mattress on which he had slept. In a pool of blood next to the mattress, the operatives found a human foot. The wounds on it were lacerated as if from bites, but somewhat strange. As if the foot had been chewed off by the prisoner himself, escaping from his imprisonment. The trail of blood stretched all the way to the stairs, but it was simply impossible to trace any further. The case is still unsolved. At one time, it was all over the newspapers, but the case was quickly hushed up. Now the file with the case is probably buried so deep in the police archives that it can't be found even if you wanted to. We left the cafe. I thanked John for his interesting story, trying to keep my voice upbeat. An hour ago, we were still talking about work, and I was sure I'd be driving home thinking about how to write what he'd asked me to write faster and easier. Right now, my brain wasn't capable of processing information unrelated to this strange story. "I'm still wondering about this," John said as we were about to leave. The muddy footprints Michael and I saw led to the basement, but I didn't see any tracks going the other way. The creature on the chain couldn't have left them. It had no shoes. So when I went down to the basement, someone else was there. Probably the one who gave the task force a warm welcome later. Someone who'd taken Michael. John took a deep breath and exhaled noisily. And he knows me by sight. I worked in an oil field in the north. The place was remote, with a name that in local parlance means something bad and evil. None of the locals called it directly. They said rotten swamp or black swamp. Nobody knew why. There were rumors about some misfortunes, but nothing concrete. So the situation: winter, minus 40 degrees, all in snow, deep night, bright moon. I need to get from the main base to one of the wells. It's 18 kilometers. A narrow winding road through the hills between tall spruce and pine trees. The forest is covered with snow. It is a black wall right up to the road, and it is impossible to move apart on it. It is so narrow. The sky is starry. The moon's shadows are sharp, and it's even bright somehow. I'm in a car. I drive fast, enjoy driving, I don't think about anything. Snow from under the wheels, headlights are burning. I'm driving alone. Suddenly I see someone quite far ahead of me. Some figure standing almost in the middle of the road, but I can't make it out because of the snow. I think probably someone's car got stuck, and the person decided to walk to avoid freezing. There were no radios on the tankers. Not that I wasn't scared, but I didn't even think anything bad. I just slowed down a bit, preparing to slow down. And then I felt as if I was frozen inside. This dark figure goes sideways, to the side of the road, to the trees. It was about the size of a man, but it didn't walk, it just slid. And I could see this movement so clearly. I remembered it 1,000 times. Even in the daytime, I looked around the place. I'll tell you ahead of time. So the figure slipped into the trees and disappeared in them. I was almost there. I saw everything so clearly that neither then nor now I can imagine that it was a trick of vision. Fear seized me. When I braked, I locked both doors manually. It was a simple car, no frills. And I'm standing there, I can't go any further. I see this place 15 meters in front of me and feel that this is still there. My hair stands on end, an amazing feeling, I'll tell you. I did everything else on automatic. For some reason, I was sure I needed to pass, but I was also sure I couldn't just do it. So, as if in a trance, I put it in reverse gear and gave the gas. I drove about 40 meters, stopped. The tension's gone, but I can feel in my skin that I'm not the only one here. And then I just hit the gas, and I'm going for it. As I get closer, I get really uncomfortable. Usually I try to ignore fear, but this was something else, some kind of instinct. And then I'm almost there. 10 meters, 5. I turn my head to the right, and there's a little gap between the trees. And there it is, just something black, as tall as a man. I pedaled to the floor and literally flew away. All I remember is cornering like a racing driver. I never thought I could drive like that. I arrived at the well, went into the car where the operators on duty were sitting. There were only 2 people at the well at night, and they were looking at me like a ghost. They asked me what I had seen. I do not answer anything. I am still in shock. And one of them suddenly starts gibbering about the fact that they have this night on the perimeter of the site, as if someone walks. But they cannot call. They look, like someone standing there, try to approach. No. Anyway, I hinted to them that I'd seen something too. I remember that we barricaded the door, and when we had to go out to the well to take readings of instruments, all 3 of us went out with crowbars. But there was nothing else, fortunately. In general, we behaved a bit like children back then. We were scared and kind of wanted to turn everything into a game. It wasn't until the afternoon that we realized that it was really scary. Later, I went to the same place in the afternoon. I got out of the car, saw that gap between the trees, but I didn't find anything special. I have a cottage outside the city. There is a forest belt along the cooperative and a railroad behind it. Once in winter, my friend and I decided to go to the forest to breathe the fresh, frosty air and at the same time to check out the house. We looked and went for a walk. On the railroad along the tracks, we found footprints clearly imprinted on the sod. They were the footprints of an animal with a paw structure like a dog's, but upright. We looked at these chains of footprints for a long time and only confirmed our guesses. The animal definitely walked on 2 legs on the railroad embankment. However, the trace itself was rather large. Besides, it is unlikely that a dog could have left such prints on the hard ground. The holes of long claws were clearly visible. The footprints descended from the mound, and then the animal seemed to stand on 4 legs again. In general, to all appearances, coming from the forest, having walked along the embankment on 2 paws, having searched along the railroad from the side of cottage, this creature went back to the forest. We were quite impressed by all this and decided to follow these tracks back into the forest. Let's go. The snow was knee-deep. In the woods, the tracks kept surprising us. They dived under low-hanging fallen trees, then just sharply changed from large tracks to small ones, like fox tracks. One step was large, the next step was small, then a few meters of small tracks, and then again large ones. The trail broke several times and resumed 10 meters away. It was jumping or flying. It was unclear. All these strange things were repeated many times. Sometimes the main trail was joined by more chains of the same kind from the depth of the forest, then separated again. We did not turn to these new ones, but followed the first one. I pay attention. I was not jumping with delight, thinking up mystical details, just looking at them and only stating the obvious. In order not to spoil the picture, my friend and I walked along the chain of footprints in a trail. That is, my friend walked ahead of me. I followed his footprints. We walked for quite a long time, not less than an hour and a half, all the time being constantly surprised. Then we got bored. We stopped at a clearing, shook the snow out of our boots, took a break, and went on our way back. The sun was setting, and it was getting colder. Naturally, we returned on our own tracks. And again the strange thing began. In spite of absolutely clearly distinguishable chains of our own, and those traces, we started to lose our way. It was not snowing. The snow cover was smooth. However, we lost the trail several times, realized that we were walking on virgin land, returned to the place where we had turned off. There was no reason to turn off. We continued on our way, and after some time we lost the trail again, and so on several times. The climax was the next find. I saw it and stopped, slightly surprised. To assess the reality of what was happening, I asked my friend without any comments, pointing my finger at the snow. "Do you see it?" He said. "I see it. It's a pentagram." Actually, I saw exactly that too, a pentagram enclosed in a circle. There were no such symbols on the way there, and I could not miss them either. A few meters after moving along the tracks, another pentagram of the same kind was found. We moved on. While we were wandering, it became dark. Far away, we heard a long howl. Having looked at each other, we accelerated our pace, but we were still far away from the sights. To the evening chill was added a disgusting chill from the unpleasant thoughts that flashed in my head. There was a cracking sound from above, and snow and small debris fell on our heads. I looked up, but I couldn't see anything. It was already dark enough. Already losing our composure, mired in the snow, we dashed in the direction we thought we should go, ignoring the tracks that had led us here. Above our heads, we could still hear the crackling and the snow flying down from the branches. It was as if something big was jumping above us from tree to tree, accompanying us. Again we heard howling, now much closer. I don't know what my friend was feeling in those seconds, but I had only one thought in my head: to get to the railroad embankment as quickly as possible, and then to the plots. We didn't feel anything, not even the cold, when we realized that what was following us through the trees was moving away in the direction of that howl. The noise and crackling became barely audible. "It switched to him," my friend whispered, panting from the fast walking. Rejoicing at the extra time we had gotten, we hurried on our way, breathing fully. In the distance, we heard a terrifying animal growl, followed by a squeal. Nearby came the clatter of the wheels of a railroad train. This gave us new strength, but the deep snow prevented us from moving with great speed. Soon we heard the cracking of limbs above us again, but we already realized that we would soon be out of the forest. It was leaping over our heads and was not going to get any closer to us. At the exit from the forest, where the trees were not so close to each other, it stopped following us. As we were crossing the embankment, we heard a long whistle from the forest. Soon we were already on the plots. As I melted the fireplace and warmed myself, I suddenly thought, maybe it was protecting us. But from whom?